Welcome to the 50 for 50 podcast for Sycamore View Church in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm your host, Anna Moser. In 2028, our church will turn 50. As we look forward to that celebration, we're taking a look back at the stories and people who have shaped our church. 50 stories over 50 months to celebrate 50 years. I encourage you to jump on our website, sycamoreview.org/50-4-50 to watch a short video telling this month's story. We'll be diving deeper into that story here with a special guest each month. So let's jump right in. Well, it is March of 2025, which means that we have hit 5 years post-COVID when everything kind of changed. So I'm here today as we kind of look back on that time for our church. And just a reminder, I think it's interesting to pause and say, like, all the stories that we're doing for 50 for 50 have been stories that have come up over and over again in conversations that both Jim and Josh here have had with a lot of people from our church. And this is a season that really shaped our world, but also our church. And so we're going to kind of look back, all three of us today, on what that season was like on being on church staff at Sycamore View. So I have with me our lead minister, Josh Ross, and our executive minister, Jim Hinkle. Hi, guys.
Hey, thanks for letting us come on the show.
I know, again, you guys are our second time guests, so you should feel pretty special. So we're going to kind of start with I think whenever there's a collective memory for like all of the world, where were you when, is the question that comes up. So where were each of us when the world shut down?
Yeah, Josh and I refer back to this a lot because he and I talked. It was such a whirlwind week. It was March 2020, middle of the month, and I think it was March 12th or maybe the 11th, we started talking on a Wednesday. You know, COVID was out there. I was on vacation with my family in Florida, and I had planned to come back to Memphis at the end of the week and begin slowly transitioning from youth minister to executive minister. And I remember Josh and I talking on the phone, I think on Wednesday, and we said, you know what, this COVID thing, it's a serious thing, but you know, let's just go ahead and meet Sunday. If people aren't comfortable coming out, that's okay. You know, we want to give permission, but let's go ahead and meet. Yeah. And then the whole rest of the next day, we talked off and on all day long. And by the end of the day, I had left Florida and come home, and we had decided along with the leadership team that we're not going to gather because we think that's what's best for the community right now. So it was a wild week.
Yeah. The weekend before, I was in Washington, D.C. speaking at an event on the East Coast. What was kind of ironic is it was the first time I ever saw someone wear a mask in an airport, and just thought, that is so weird. I've never seen that before, not knowing within weeks we ought to be wearing them. And the theme of the event was called Breathe. It was based on Ezekiel 37, the story of the dry bones. And I say ironic just because how much I was going to need that in my life, you know. So I was there that weekend. I was back at Sycamore View to preach the Sunday before everything shut down. On that Thursday night, I was at Soulfish, where our friend Jerry Taylor from Abilene was in town. I was there with a few leaders and ended up in the parking lot for probably half of that dinner, where I was talking on the leadership team with Randy. I don't remember if you were on the call or not, but there were a group of us who. We did not make a decision that night to suspend services, but we knew within the next 24 hours it was a high probability that this is what we were going to do. On Friday, I went to Nashville, where I did a wedding for Trevor Forsythe, Trevor and Hannah, his sister's Hannah, but he also married a Hannah. And so Friday night I was having those conversations, and I sent the church-wide email on Saturday that we were suspending our Sunday morning events. And I sent it from the courtyard of an Embassy Suites on a Saturday afternoon, did a wedding Saturday night, and drove home to preach on just in front of a camera on
Yeah,
Sunday
in
morning.
an empty worship center.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and on Friday, when I came back early from vacation, Stacy and I came up to the church building. There was nobody here, and moved out of the youth office and into my new office. And that was a real, that just messed with my mind. You know, I'd been a youth minister for 25 years, and saw a kind of a long exit ramp where I was going to work with whoever was coming on afterward, and we were going to do a lot of things together. And all of a sudden it was like, boom,
Wow.
this just happened. So it was pretty crazy. How about you, Anna?
Yeah, I remember the like Monday before all that happened, we had an elders meeting, like our monthly meeting, and it was like kind of mentioned, but at that point we had no idea the next like 2 or 3 days it was going to change drastically how serious this was. And then the Monday after we had suspended services, we had a staff meeting where we all kind of sat spread out in a room. Like at that point, we're just doing the best we can with the information we have. Like, I think if we just all spread out, we'll be okay. And so we met, and I got a call that my house alarm was going off. So I was heading home, and then I got a call on my way home that my mom had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I didn't really, at that point, come back to the office for a couple months because I wanted to be able to go and be with my mom whenever she was going to be able to have surgery, but surgeries were all seen as elective or things like that. And so I quarantined at my house for like a week by myself, and then drove all the way to Austin to be there, and ended up staying for a whole month. So we did Zoom staff meetings and made videos for kids with my nieces helping me out. And it all just kind of, yesterday we were talking, trying to remember the order of events. I think the way that our brains process something so huge like that, it all kind of gets muddled together. But we remember those moments, and I definitely remember that moment of not only is the world shutting down, but my mom is about to be on a cancer journey during a world shutdown. And
I remember we called you that day because when you let us know about your mom, we were like, you're coming over to our house.
Yes,
and you came over, and we like at that point, everything's like, don't hug people. And you walked in our house, and we were like, we're hugging you.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the hardest things, I think, being single during that season. And I'm so glad, like looking back at it, I would never want my mom to have had cancer, but being able to be with my family for that month when so many people were isolated, I don't know like how I would have functioned by myself at my house for that whole month without any physical contact with people. And so getting to be with my family and my nieces, even though it was like bad circumstances, I'm really thankful for that time. And I think a lot of people probably have those stories of that time of like, even though we were forced to be stuck at home and nothing was happening, like there were some sweet moments of being with family or being with loved ones, but also remembering the people that had nobody, and how isolating and traumatizing that was for a lot of people, just the fear. And so we look back at that season, we see a lot of faithfulness of God, but there was also a lot of fear we had to wrestle with and big decisions to make. And you just stepped into this executive minister role. So that was a crazy season. I thought we'd kind of look back at kind of the overview of the big timeline of everything, and then kind of look at moments where we saw the faithfulness of God, but then also saw those moments where the fear, because I think there are a lot of verses about fear not in the Bible, but I think there's also a God meets us in our fears and is with us in those storms. And so realizing that there are things that we are afraid of. And there was just a lot of that for not just our church, but our whole world during that time. So we went online, and several Sundays after that, you guys did the whole recording services live, but online streaming for couple months.
Into a camera,
just an empty worship center with just the people that are there recording.
Well, we suspended March 15th, 2020, and I was looking back at some of our information. We didn't actually come back in person and unmasked, or at least mask optional, until January of 2022. And even when we did that, we had a section where social distance was being maintained for the immunocompromised folks in our church. And so it was over a year and a half, almost 2 years, where what we had done on a regular basis, we no longer could do. And so all the things in between, it's like, what didn't we try?
Yeah.
And one of the most bittersweet memories for me, just images, was when we would record the Sunday morning worship. I would usually have a role. I would kind of always be the family news guy, and Josh was preaching. Kip was there with a few praise team members. And there were about 10 of us in the worship center having this experience and recording it, and it was just so bizarre to be in our worship center with less than a dozen people having a worship experience, meeting God, but realizing what's not happening. And it was simultaneously it was inspiring, but it was also really, really gut-wrenching. I wasn't there. My family didn't go with me. And the rest of the family, the Sycamore View family, wasn't there. And so we came back together and started meeting in person in the middle of the summer of 2020. So we had a couple months where we did the recorded thing. And I think it was a great attempt to try to stay connected. We were working with the best information we had. And, the paranoia, you guys remember wiping down groceries when you brought them back? Like that was something the CDC recommended. I remember at one point, I would walk outside and you just felt like if I take a breath and there's somebody else outside exhaling, boom, I'm a goner. And it was the level of paranoia was just that broad. But we came back in the middle of the summer. We were distanced. We had 2 services. We were fully masked for the whole time. And it was kind of like, this is kind of awesome and this is kind of awful. Yeah. Like all at the same time. So I remember those were some of our first steps back the first couple of months.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I had some friends that visited during that time, and it's just like, we were Sycamore View, but we weren't Sycamore View. We were trying the best to do whatever we could. But there were just times, I remember getting up and doing communion thoughts one Sunday, and I'm like, I just broke down because I was like, I knew there were people at home that were taking communion. We had drive-by communion. We had the Hardys made that how to make communion bread video. And we're getting really creative, but just communion isn't meant to be taken by yourself in your house. Or even in a worship center separated from all these people. It's meant to be something that brings us together. And it was just a hard season, but like you said, God was faithful. And with kid stuff and teen stuff, that was also hard because even once the vaccines came out, there were certain age groups that didn't have that option. And so we still had to separate when we tried to start doing children's worship or a family class, being with people that you're close with already or okay with. But kids, they just want to sit by their friends, to try to separate by 6 feet. And those little tabletops was weird, but it was just nice to be able to, because I love being around kids, and not being able to be around kids in that area of children's worship or anything was just really tough. So I'm glad when we were finally able to slowly get back to doing things. And we kept saying, when we get back to normal, but I think there was this eventual realization that things will never really be the way that they were before. There were people that we lost, both to death, but also just lost from our church. They found other places to be, or and so there's just a mourning of that. But then also realization that we grew a lot in that too, and we're never going to go back to who we were before. But this is kind of who we are now. Right. So I kind of got off of going through the timeline of things.
What are some things that stand out to you in that 2020, 2021, just moments or events?
Going back to write this script and to work with you guys, even in the podcast, is so many memories coming back. Some of them I can recall, and then others it just kind of are dug up even in this moment. When you think about just those first 2 months of COVID, there were just so many days I found myself emotional because I was just so out of rhythm, and there was so much uncertainty that we just didn't know. Like, is this going to be how we're going to be? Like, is this forever? I remember I had a few weeks where we set up a like FaceTime with Josh kind of thing, and people signed up, and I remember getting on FaceTime with members who would just be, laid out, almost like paralyzed of just depression. And those are just hard, dark moments, yet you saw the faithfulness of God bring people to life and insert hope in places that maybe I didn't think hope existed. And looking back, there was an appreciation of how God carries the church and carries his people through hard seasons. And so, this is kind of nostalgic right now.
Well, I think about some of the creativity and the imagination that was used because we couldn't do things that the way we did them, right? And I remember our at the end of March, all the ministers, we wrote down a list of 3 things. Here's stuff I still can do. Here's stuff I no longer can do. And here's stuff maybe I can do. And it was people just thinking outside the box. And that was some of my favorite, looking back, those were some exciting times. They didn't always land well, but the idea of, hey, we can do this, let's stay together. Like when we had several drive-through experiences. Like we had a new staff person come, and we had this beautiful 2-hour drive-through parade where people would stop and greet them outside room 1 and introduce themselves. Senior Sunday was drive-through, and so you had the church who would come by, and every senior had a tent outside in the parking lot, and they'd yell through the window and give them a gift. And then our trunk or treat, we had tons of people come, but we didn't feel like we could hand candy, and be within the social distancing, the 6 feet minimum. And so we worked with the Kingsbury VOTEC program, and they cut us like 100 PVC pipes that were 6 feet long. And so our Sycamore View people could stand at the back of their car and then shoot a piece of candy, 6 feet away into trunk or treat. Those drive-through things, they were crazy, but they were really beautiful because we were trying to kind of keep it together. We had a couple of outdoor worship experiences that were really meaningful and really really special. Not camp. We had camp, but we couldn't have camp, so we just did something. We said, this is not camp. That's what it's called this year. And you had the youth group up in the Impact trying to bond and trying to connect, and they were so hungry to be together, but they were also scared, and their parents were scared. But a lot of beautiful creativity and imagination. And Anna, some of the work you did while you were in Austin, filming Bible classes and Bible studies and devotionals, that was some of the best work I think you
became a screenwriter.
You ever did,
Producer.
My nieces thought I could go to LA and make
seriously, yeah. I mean, it was really beautiful. And Josh's leadership, he was trying to reach out to like at least 6 families a day for the longest time, and was really passionate about staying connected. And yet I think a lot of us also kind of were on the verge of burnout because we had no boundaries then. It was just like everything's crisis because you're always in crisis mode. And so it was a beautiful, but it was a lot. I do not want to. I do not want to go through that again.
I want to go back, but
you add just the turmoil of 2020, and which we haven't given a lot of voice to on the podcast right now, but just up to this point, but just the social unrest,
right?
The horrific murders, the presidential debates. I mean, it was just a hard season, and as a church that isn't afraid to give voice to things, it was so hard that we're giving voice to people, calling them to a spirit of unity and joy and togetherness, but you're doing it through a screen,
right?
and any effort. Just, it was hard. I mean, and this was not true for all of our people, but it was easy for folks to engage like church content while their TV is turned to their cable news station. So you're like, the way people were taking in content, it was just, there were so many voices that were just got our attention, and it just made it made for a lot of challenges that summer and early into the fall.
Yeah. You just wanted to hug people.
You did.
There was just a lot of hurt and pain for all of those reasons.
Or even a lot of times in my ministry, when there's any conflict, it's like, let's go to lunch so we can sit down and we can eat, or we can drink a cup of coffee, or we can be in the same room as we process this. And maybe there were occasional times there were like patios or porches, but like you didn't have that option. Or let's just be in a church where we can talk about something that's going on in the world, but we can take communion together in this space as we do. Like those things, we didn't have it.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories was, do you guys remember our staff Christmas party?
I was driving to Austin again.
We usually get together for staff Christmas party, but this year we couldn't get together. I mean, we still had to stay spread out. So we had a caterer do like a box lunch, and we all got on Zoom and we were all at our own desks. And then I dressed up as Santa Claus, and when it was like your turn, I'd like run into the office and say, "Ho ho!" And we had little Christmas bonuses because our expenses were so low that year.
What I think I would read, I think I had like a word of blessing or something over a person, and like at the very end, it revealed who the person was, and that gave you time to run to the office.
I know, man. I was glad I was in good shape because I was running, and we almost gave Donna a heart attack.
We're out of breath.
Yeah. What a crazy time.
Oh yeah, staff meetings. Those Zoom meetings were fun. There were times I did like the mask Sycamore View member. I would bring on. They would just pop on with masks, and y'all had to try to guess who it was.
Yeah.
We had Stephen Pate, Dylan Stover. Anyway,
that was fun.
And
to keep us going here.
Kids on Zoom too. I'll never forget just the randomness, because they just wanted to see each other. I basically, like, at first I tried to have like a class on Zoom, but I'm like, really, it needs to just be a show and tell.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Tell us about what's going on. They were just excited to see each other. But I really, especially for like school teachers and things during that time, I can't imagine, or parents that were trying to do online school with their kids at home.
Yeah.
Well,
you were talking about your experience, being single.
And
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. We had 6 children in the home, ages kindergarten to senior in college.
Yeah.
And I was going crazy with 8 people in the house. All at one point in time, I checked our router. We had 17 devices connected, and the office became my getaway because no one was up here. But I think one of the things COVID seemed to kind of almost magnify what was already there in a lot of ways. And so for a lot of people who had given time and attention to the internal life, to the deep spiritual life, they were able to move through that and love people. And for people who had maybe just kind of been a cultural Christian, it was a time where it's like, well, what's the point? There's no point. All this stuff is so disrupting in my life, and that's not a stabilizing force. And I think in homes too, you had marriages and parent-child relationships, and if there were some if you had a positive environment, there were some real blessings in that. But man, some of our hardest ministry moments were just knowing that there's a really dysfunctional family or marriage, and they're stuck together, and it just exaggerated that. So much heartache and brokenness mixed into all that wild, creative imagination.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to make sure we mention and talk about a little bit in the podcast is some of the things that, now looking back on it, that were set up in like 2019 for us as like a church leadership that prepared us in a way for being where we were in 2020. So you guys mentioned the leadership team change in structure, and creating more space for our shepherds to be shepherds and have shepherding groups and assigning those. And we did all of that in 2019. And then there would be like a kind of a person who was the leader of the leadership team. So that was Randy Frederick, who is a doctor. So that was also like an in the know of all of the information. And you guys had made a leadership team matrix. And so like who makes what decisions when was already established. So it didn't have to be like, well, who decides if we don't have worship? That was in the matrix of who makes all those decisions. But I think especially the shepherding groups, because of what you were talking about of like different family situations, I think people knowing that they had a personal shepherd checking in on them, delivering your books, that Anchoring in the Storm book, but just different moments where I hope that created space for us to be able to be more intentional, not just from a staff standpoint, but our shepherds. Is there anything else like that looking back that you kind of see how God got us in a space to get through that season?
Yeah, and I often throw in here, like, I'm not a Calvinist, but I believe in the providence of God. Like somehow God has foresight. God has, so there were some things, and everything you just mentioned. I mean, this was like a year and a half in the making. Like I had kind of functioned as the lead minister / kind of exec from 2015 to 2019. And some of those things we just did because they had to be done. Some of them fall within my gift set, some did not. So the fact that Jim was already transitioning into that position was a gift from God and a gift to our team. Because I think there are just some things I would not have been able to provide organizationally once COVID really hit and shut things down. But by that, all that culminated in a December meeting where things were approved in December of 2019. So, I mean, you mentioned it, the leadership team, which gave us just allowed decision making to be done much better and more efficiently, but also gave the rest of the shepherds who are not on the leadership team a purpose, like with their shepherding group. So this is something that had been a part of our church culture years ago that we kind of brought back in a more intentional way. The leadership matrix, like it was months and months of work to put together that matrix, which was so helpful. And you're right, the fact that Randy Frederick was approved. Now, the way we do this is a leadership team. The chair is both the chair of the leadership team and the eldership. So the multiple meetings where Randy was able to lead those through all of 2020. And as you know, Randy, it's so much wisdom, but just his presence is what we needed in that season. It's you don't rattle Randy. Like he is a steady, peaceful, I am fully present in the moment, just shepherd and pastor, which was just such a gift to us.
Shepherd, pastor, and physician to help us navigate all of the mixed messages that you were getting from the
I mean, he brought clarity to so much. It kept us calm, I think, in moments when we probably were just, kind of embracing all the chaos around us. So how all that stuff was in place. And the fact that our elders, I think it was in March or February or March, they approved the vision of the awakening, which didn't get much traction, but the core values, which did. And that we went ahead and moved forward with those in May. Even though we were on screens, let's give the church something to embody and live into. And Caroline was on board with us that summer as an intern to help create some core value material that was able to go to all members. So I'm grateful for a leadership that had worked through some really hard things in preparation for a hard season and were willing to move forward with like some values and a vision to keep us rooted and grounded.
Yeah. And now looking back on it, I know it's still kind of hard to say what like the lasting impact of that season, because I think maybe we're still seeing it in a little bit. But what do you kind of see where we are now? Because even like the 2028 50 for 50, the first time we had those conversations, we were doing distance staff meetings and spacing out. And I remember thinking, I feel like COVID will be one of those stories, but we have no idea where this is going and how it'll shape us. So how do you feel like it has shaped us?
We're looking at each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's
So much.
there's an affirmation of just the word resiliency comes up. Like I remember early on in COVID, going back in church history with some of the plagues and probably epidemics, not pandemics. It wasn't so much global; they were more local. But and historically, you read in the books how the church rose up in those times because God reminded the church of who they are. Like in hard times, the church stands strong and presses in and cares for both their own, but also people who may be outside of the church family. And you hear these like think about 100 years ago when that flu outbreak, like tens of millions of people died and churches were not able to meet at all, and they had no, like, you didn't even have radio for most people. Like there was no way for people to connect. So just how God rallies the church and has rallied the church through hard seasons for 2,000 years. It does something to my spirit. Like we have a God who's not giving up on his dreams and his purposes, and that it does something to me and grows my appreciation for how we keep pressing into the heart of God too.
You know, there's a lot of lasting impressions and consequences, like you said, that I'm not sure we've completely unpacked. But you know, technology being a really big way in which we gather. That's a lasting thing, and in some ways for the better. I do think people who, if they're sick, if they're traveling, like they stay connected, and they on the regular will say, "Hey, I caught yesterday's service, or I was watching online." You didn't really have that before, so that's positive. And we have people who watch from all over the country and all over the world, and you know, I'm in a role where I see giving, and on a regular basis, we receive some, contribution from somebody I've never heard of that's not in Memphis, Tennessee, or West Tennessee, or maybe even the Southeast. And I try to trace down, who is this person? I find out it's somebody that watches online on a regular basis, and they heard about Sycamore View, or they have a relative here and have visited once, so there's trying to understand who our church family is. Like we're still trying to figure that out, I think, because we've got 5 commitments of membership, and we're trying to lean more heavily into that. And but I think there was kind of a general just assumption about what it meant to be a part of the church pre-COVID, and a lot of that went away. So maybe being a part of the church, maybe it's not for some people that I show up in person, but we want it to be, right? But we've got to redefine that, and we've got to work toward that. So I think just technology and the staying connected virtually, but sometimes substituting that for real, like it's a win and it's a loss. It's a win that people can stay connected, but it's a loss that sometimes we feel like the staying connected through a screen is just as good as being in person, and it's not. It's better than nothing, but let's not substitute. Let's not substitute. So I think that's one thing. And just I'm still heartbroken about some people who just kind of faded away. I've talked to them. They're just, a lot of them are just not in church. Like they've just kind of stepped away, and they love Jesus, but they've heard Christians say so much stuff that seems anti-gospel with a lot of the politics and the racial divisions and strife. So I'm heartbroken about that. I feel like God can redeem that. But God's plan is the church. Like it's community. It's not me and Jesus and, the rest of you guys, good luck. But it's working out our faith and community. So I haven't figured out what that's going to look like, but I think that's a big deal. And, what trauma does is it creates these gashes in our soul. And when we hit the next trauma, it reopens that stuff, right? And so we know that it changes your biology, it changes your chemical balance. And so I think there are some things, sometimes we step into something and we don't realize we've just reopened a wound because of fill in the blank happened during COVID. And so I think being aware of that is something we still, even though it's 5 years from the onset of COVID, that season was, a solid 2 to 3 year thing where things were just disrupted and not what they used to be. And they never will be again. But, I hope ultimately people listening to this podcast will say, man, God is good, and he never left us alone.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel, even though sometimes I did not have the awareness of his presence and got in a really bad place mentally and emotionally. But that's on me. That's not on God. And so I hope that's the theme of this COVID podcast, that God never leaves us. He's promised that.
That's faithful. Yep. And if you were listening to this outside of the Sycamore View family, you can give at sycamoreview.org. Or just email jhinkle@sycamoreview.org. I'd be glad to send you a link, make it real easy for you.
Oh, man. Well, thank you both so much. It was very nostalgic. It was kind of sad, hard to think back, like you said, of a lot of the losses relationally during that time, but very thankful for both of you and the way that you led our church vulnerably and honestly, and in a season where nobody really knew what we were doing, but we were trusting God and trusting his leadership. And so I thank you both for pressing through that with us and giving us all space to be wherever we needed to be and do whatever we needed to do. I felt like Sycamore View was a place where we were, we had a lot of people that fell in different places on all of that. And we tried to make space for everybody to do what they needed to do. And so that was a challenge, I know, making those decisions. There was just no way to please everybody. And that can hurt as a leader. And so, but it can grow you as a leader. And so I think there's a lot of growth too through that for all of us. So thank you both for being here again, round 2. So and next month we'll be coming back, because every April we have our 901 offering month, and so we focus on one of our strategic partners locally we focus on all of them for the 901 offering, but on the podcast we're going to focus on one of our local strategic partners, and that'll be Hope Works. So we'll see you next time.